Ban the bank shorts. What's in a rumor? Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Insights, brought to you by Ainslie Bullion and the Gold and Silver Standard. Today, we welcome back Alex, who's been looking at this whole concept of banning shorts, and it's something that certainly riled me up a little bit today. So I'm very interested to talk about this. So welcome back, Alex.
Thank you for having me again, Chris, and happy birthday for today.
Oh, thank you. Yes, it is an exciting day. We're on the birthday, and that was all going well until I read your piece on bank shorting, and I went, what? We're here again? Because this isn't something this is the first time it's happened. And I remember like thinking back into situations in the past where they've been banning shorting, and it really, to me, it just says it's like a action you take when you've run out of other actions to take to look like you're doing something. So it really got me rolled up. But let's start at the beginning. Okay, let's start with before I get to that little rant, can we start with what does shorting something actually mean for those people who might not understand what this is all about?
So shorting is basically where you pretend to buy the stock, I guess, and sell it in the future. So you are committing to selling a stock in the future. So you take the current price now, which say is $50, but you commit to sell it for $10 in the future. So right. There's a $40 differential there, and you're hoping that the price drops into the future. A short squeeze, which most people would have heard before, is basically when that price goes up. And so say the $50, you're expecting it to drop to 10, suddenly jumps to 70 and you lose money. So that's
so in that situation, that example you just gave, you'd lose $20 if it goes to 70 because it's gone against you. But if it goes down, so you're betting effectively that the price of the stock is going to go lower, and you can clean up if that happens.
Yeah, so everyone in the US right now is betting that regional banks will go lower. So far they've been pretty accurate. So
not a terrible bet to make.
Not a terrible bet to make. And we've just seen the domino effect of one bank after the other. Once the shorts or the market, one bank collapses, the market's moving to the next one, and they've identified the next three banks. And there's now greater and greater short interest on it.
So that in some ways makes sense as an easy target if you want to say this is what's causing the problem, because people betting that the price of the stock is going to go down seems like an easy target, an easy group to blame for what's going on. But is shorting actually the problem here from your perspective?
So shorting bans have happened a couple of times in history, but most noticeably over financial stocks in 2008. If you don't short, you sell the stock now. I mean, it's a market mechanism that controls the stock price. In fact, what they recognized in 2008 was that by banning short selling, they actually took liquidity out of the market. So what that meant was there were less people with any interest in the bank at all. So the short ban happened, and they believe that about $500 million extra in cost was incurred because of it. So it had no benefit whatsoever, and it cost the market more. So no, short selling is not what the problem is here. So this, to me, first of all, it was, the first bank, that's the problem. Now we're up to First Republic a week ago. That was the problem. You had the CEO of JP Morgan standing up and saying, well, this should be the end of it. Well, here we are again. There's three banks that are not teetering, I guess, but their share prices have collapsed. And they're now saying it's short selling. But ultimately, if the shorts weren't there, people would be selling faster. And so the price may even suggest that it'd be lower.
That's a really important point, because that's how I sort of reconcile it and remember it as well from that example that you're using, talk about the GFC, because people don't understand, who just blame them automatically, the short sellers, that a lot of people who are actually shorting the stock will be doing that as part of a hedged position. So what that sort of means is that they may actually still hold the stock. They don't want to actually sell it. And there can be a lot of reasons for not wanting to sell a stock, like even for tax implications, for example. So you don't want to sell it to actually realize the loss, but you want to lock in the price. So if you're betting that it goes down and you're holding the stock, you sort of have an up bet and a down bet at the same time. You're net neutral. So that is actually a really important part of what makes markets function. And exactly what you just said to me is the biggest issue. When you ban that capacity, the liquidity dries up, like you said. But the only option you've got then is, if you're worried about it, to dump it. So wouldn't that, in fact, exaggerate the very thing they're trying to prevent?
That is exactly what happened in 2008. The day they banned the short sells, you had what would have been called short covering, where everyone quickly buys the stock because they have to, because you're not allowed to be selling it into the future. So I believe it drove up about 30% the market that day, and then it dumped. And it continued to dump for 6 months. You saw way more bank collapses. So there were about 10 or so in the 6 months prior. Then there were 30 or 40 in the 6 months after.
Wow,
and prices continued to drop, 70, 80%. So it achieved absolutely nothing.
It probably exaggerated it, but I wonder if they claim victory on that first little period, because they go, look, we banned it and the prices all popped.
Yeah, it's actually interesting. There was the person who was in charge of the SEC at the time. His name was Cox. He apparently pushed back at the time and said, no, this is a market mechanism, was kind of pushed into it by the government. And a year later just said that was one of the biggest mistakes we made. So the SEC made at the time. So, looks great first day. Everyone look over here. It's okay. The share price has risen again. 2 weeks later, back to where it was. So they achieved nothing. And they didn't save banks in the process.
No. And I think that's why I'm so riled up on my birthday of all days about this, because to me, as someone who's used shorts before, for various reasons, I've used it for the hedging purpose, but I've also used it to bet on, not usually stocks, but to bet on something going down. It's the same thing, right? Like, you betting on something going down means someone else is betting on it going up, because that's how the markets work. You've got two sides to every trade.
Gold and silver markets work in such a way that a lot of mines go, start operation and say, right, today the price is $2,000 an ounce. In order to be profitable, we need it to be above this number. So they'll sell into the market. It is a normal mechanism.
And without that mechanism, no one has the capacity to actually price things stably. So using the gold and silver example, if we don't have that capacity to be able to hedge positions by shorting or go long positions by using leverage or whatever, all of those institutions that rely on that to keep their prices stable, what do? They have to ramp up the actual price. So if you're talking about buying physical gold, for example, you need to build in a bigger spread, because you have to factor in, we could take a loss here because we can't hedge out the risk.
Yeah, less mines would start ultimately. It'd slow things down.
Yep. And that's right, because you need that also for funding. And it's also complicated. And it really is concerning that the people who seem to be making these decisions don't understand any of this. Like, fascinating.
Well, hindsight's one of those things that you can use. And to even be talking about this, so this was brought up that the Biden administration is watching this, then JP Morgan, the analysts, started talking about it. But they have the hindsight of what 2008 did. They have the commentary from everyone saying it was a mistake. And yet it is even being spoken about is just, ridiculous.
Yeah. Politically expedient. So if all this doesn't really work, which we've identified here,
probably won't.
We see, well, it hasn't traditionally. What's it all really about then? So what ultimately do you think comes next if it doesn't work? Because you could argue it's about politicians who don't understand it or whatever, but what comes next? How do we sort of see through where this ends up?
Well, if you were to compare 2008, and you can't always, that was deflationary, this is inflationary, but there was an escalation in the collapse of banks. So, there's a link in the article today where you can go to a wiki page which talks about how many banks collapsed, and you can see that it went from 10 to about 30 or 40 in the 6 months afterwards. So it did nothing. If this freight train continues, this just keeps going. So ultimately the problem is that the Fed and every central bank around the world right now are raising interest rates at such a pace that banks do not have the ability to match their debt with their their loan book, I guess. So
Yep.
in Australia, where you've got variable rates on most of the mortgages and a lot of the loans, there's not a mismatch. So we don't in Australia have quite the same mismatch as the US, whereas the US has 30-year mortgages, which did wonderfully well for everyone during the GFC in some ways that they could reprice their mortgages. But right now, the banks can't. The banks have these 30-year 1% loans, and they now have got 5-6% debt with the government. They cannot. There's no time to adjust.
And that's a consistent message that we're getting. Like you've been discussing that when we were talking to Branko last week, he was discussing the same thing. It's really so clear. And it feels like we're just being sort of taken for fools to say, you look over here, example used before. I love that. Yeah, look over here. It's the short sellers now. Like I said to you before, when this all started, remember it was all crypto? Remember it was these are the crypto banks. They're the reason that we're having this banking crisis, when it had nothing to do with that. Now it's like, it's the short sellers,
Yeah. Oh, it was First Republic. Oh, it was this bank. Oh, that's
poor
the
management.
only bank.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, and we've spoken about the further the Fed raises, the bigger the issue becomes for these banks. Like it may, at 3% may have been an issue for just one bank. 6% might be an issue for another, but 8% is an issue for another 20. You can't get away from, there is a gradual climb as to who the rate increases start to really damage and what point. And I know these banks would know their limits, and obviously a few have hit, and if they keep going, they will keep getting hit.
And I dare say the market knows, because you've got a lot of, like, if you use the old sort of analogy, the market always knows what's going on because it's the sum of everyone's thoughts. The prices where they are tells you that we're already there for a lot of those other banks as well, that they've
That's
already
exactly
passed
right.
that point where it's distressed. So it's not going to miraculously become undistressed with no change to the fundamentals that caused the problem in the first place.
There's plenty of graphs on Twitter and all of that people have put together where they've identified who's next.
Yep.
So, and
it's bingo at the moment, isn't it? You see all the little banks in their squares,
right. And it's not like they predict, this whole thing, I'll blame Twitter now because everyone's withdrawing money. Absolutely, that is part of the problem. But you can't accurately predict over and over and over again who's going to be next without acknowledging that maybe there's more to Twitter than just, run to the one side of the room and then the other. They actually are predicting it pretty well.
Yep. There's lots going on there, and it's certainly very interesting and certainly very frustrating. I
think it's going to be very difficult when, you remember Wizard of Oz and pulling aside the green curtain and seeing who was running it behind. Yeah. It kind of feels like that's going on at the moment.
It certainly does. Well, Alex, thanks as always for your deep dive into all of this. A topic that I think everyone will find quite interesting, and certainly one we need to watch, because it is, like you said in the title, it's only rumours effectively at this stage, but we've seen these rumours escalate quite quickly recently, and we've been on the right side of most of those rumours ending up turning into facts. So something we'll keep an eye on.
Great. Well, thank you for having me, and happy birthday.
Thank you very much. Thanks everyone for watching. Remember, reach out with any questions or comments on social platforms. We'll get back to you on those. That's us for today. Stay safe and keep an eye out in those markets, everyone, and we'll talk to you later in the week. Thanks.